So hi again, Serge, and thanks again for making time, for stopping. And it's just kind of a street experiment, you could say, that we're doing, whereby we're just stopping regular Canadians on the street and just asking them what they know about Islam, or if they have any questions or any concerns about Islam. Like, as you know, 2 weeks ago there was that infamous hate crime in London, Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
You heard about the Muslim family that was run over by a guy in a pickup truck? Yeah. So sometimes these things happen due to misconceptions that people have about Islam and about Muslims. So if we can play any part in trying to explain or to clarify some of those misconceptions, it would be a good thing. So I'm just curious to know then if like what it is that you know or understand about Islam, or what Muslims believe, and if you have any Muslim friends,
I've had some Muslim friends. Most of them have moved away, just because that's how things go in upper education. You get your degree and you move.
Yeah.
I haven't really. I know they celebrate like Ramadan and stuff like that, and so at Eid, stuff like that. But as for like the finer details, I don't really know too much.
Or how about the theology? In other words, like, what are the main beliefs that are motivating Muslims to want to fast or to do these other things that it strikes us as counterintuitive, right? You're hungry, the intuitive thing is to eat. It's counterintuitive to say that I'm going to restrain from eating for a set amount of time. So there has to be some kind of belief or conviction, right, that is driving that behavior or that religious practice. So in terms of those beliefs, what do you know about what Muslims believe about the world, or what their worldview is?
Not too much. I mean, mostly just treat people, regardless of their religion, as based on like how they act, right, and if they're a decent person.
Yeah, no, that's part of it for sure. Yeah.
It hasn't really been necessary, or I haven't really had the curiosity to.
Yeah. No, I get you. Are you aware that Muslims, for example, believe in God, that we believe in the Creator? Is that something that you're aware of?
Is it Allah?
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, vaguely stuff like that, but that's common to many religions, right? So.
And to be honest with you, this is not necessarily any kind of shortcoming on your part. I mean, personally, I feel that this is a failing of Muslims sometimes as well too, because sometimes we're shy as well to talk about those issues. You know what I mean? So if I'm your buddy, I don't necessarily. What I mean is we're classmates and everything. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily sometimes want to risk stepping on your toes or offending you by telling you I believe in God, because maybe you're a hardened atheist that hates God. There's this kind of idea out there, I'm saying. And so we're more likely to share a little bit about our practices, like, sorry, Serge, I can't join you for lunch because it's Ramadan. I'm fasting right now. We fast. But as Muslims, sometimes we fail to explain, why we're doing these things. So the point here being that, our belief in the Creator is that main driving force. So we believe that this biology that you're studying at University of Toronto, this amazing thing, life sciences and how the human body is designed. I'm using that word designed. They might not use that word, but the way that it's put together, right? The way it works, the way the body functions, even zoology and animal bodies and how they function and all that. What we're saying is that all of this is not coincidental. It didn't create itself. It didn't come out of a vacuum of nothingness. But all of this has to be anchored in some kind of eternal truth and eternal being. So that is what we call Allah. You're right. Allah is like the Arabic word which means the deity or the God. Yeah. And so from our perspective, this may or may not matter to you, but we're standing in front of Trinity College, so it's kind of relevant to point out that from our perspective, we see Islam as fitting in with the other Abrahamic religions. So it's part of the same family of religions as Judaism and Christianity.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, everyone's got their own, like, people have their own opinions about religion and whether they believe in it or not. And I don't think it necessarily has to conflict with, how the world works. So I think there's going to be always reasonable people who accept, like, discussion, and other people who are basically have an us versus them mentality, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And see, even as I use that term, the Abrahamic family of religions, so family is bickering, But family's not supposed to be bickering. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So we all have these
siblings
cousins
fight.
that we have siblings or we have cousins that we see the world differently from. But we should not forget that common bond or that link that we have. So with Islam, certainly we do not make any secret of the fact that we are related to the previous Abrahamic religions, whether that's important to you or not. But we do see ourselves as coming from the same line. So what I mean by that more specifically is that you've heard of the Prophet Muhammad, for example. You've heard the name of the Prophet Muhammad, right?
Yeah.
So we believe Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the final prophet or messenger that God sent to guide humanity. But the operative word here being the final messenger, not the only messenger. So we believe that Moses, who the Jews believe in, we believe he too was a prophet and a teacher sent by God. The Jesus, whom the Christians believe in, we believe that he too was a teacher and a messenger sent by God. But the main difference on this point is that we don't view Jesus as a divine or God. We don't say he's God in the flesh or the Son of God. We say he's a human being and he's a human prophet and a messenger sent by God. So don't make too much of the similarities between Islam and the Abrahamic religions. There's some very important points of departure as well too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean,
we say God is one. He never became a man. He never became a woman.
Studies science, basically, religion to me is just something that you either believe in or don't, and you can't really prove it. So, you know, to me, there are of course like differences between the different religions, but they all have like that similarity, and therefore it's like if you want to believe in it, go ahead. And if you don't, well, also go ahead. Just try to be courteous between each other.
Exactly. No, I see your point. I definitely see your point. But here's a little bit of friendly pushback, right? I would say that when we talk about proof, here it depends on what kind of proof we're talking about, right? So I would certainly agree with you that I cannot scientifically directly prove that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was the messenger of God in the sense that you would do in your biology lab. So I can't put anything under a microscope for you and say, there's God, or there's the prophethood of Muhammad right there under the microscope, right? But I think if we expand our idea of proof to logical proofs or philosophical proofs, then I would argue as a Muslim that then there is proof for everything in Islam. We could prove that, we could demonstrate that, but not in the way that science would demonstrate empirical truths.
Well, I mean, for example, you can prove something mathematically, right? But I respectfully disagree that you
disagree, please do. Please do.
To say that you can prove the existence of God is philosophically, I'm kind of curious what your argument is.
I'll try it out, but before I go there, you mentioned math, and okay, absolutely, you're right. 1 + 1, we can directly, empirically demonstrate it right here and now. Or 2 + 2, we can directly, empirically demonstrate it right here and now. But I think even in math, on higher levels of math, I think even there we are making some philosophical inferences. So for example, if you type in, I don't know, 33,628,000.021 times 110 in the calculator, you haven't actually verified the answer, right? When the answer comes, you haven't actually, no one's actually done that. No one's actually taken 30 trillion pieces of grass or 30 trillion pieces of wood and then multiplied it by 100 and whatever number I said, and then counted it to actually verify the answer, right? So even there, we're building by inference. We're building by inference, I think, even in mathematics on some level.
Well, I mean,
like right now, directly, empirically, would you be able to demonstrate to me if we typed in any such number, 110,000, let's just say, times 23?
Well,
or would we be relying on the calculator?
With just numbers. Usually they do it with symbols and, you know, like A times B equals EB, things like that. The number is just an object that can be replaced with anything. It doesn't matter what specific number it is. It will be, you know, like A times B equals AB. You know, it equals like a number. It will be true. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I agree that we're working on formulas based on symbols, right? Which they've worked on the micro level, and we're assuming that they work on the macro level. But I'm saying nobody's empirically directly demonstrated it under a microscope. Like whatever answer the calculator gives to you to my crazy math question, we haven't put that answer under a microscope, right? To actually be able to count and verify in that way. And it's not necessary. I'm not saying I'm not some radical skeptic that says that the calculator is lying.
I mean,
I'm saying it's reasonable to infer that. Yeah.
Floating point error from computation and stuff like that. But I mean, there's a certain level of precision that is just not necessary at some point, So.
Yeah. So with you're curious about philosophical proofs, right, for Allah or for a creator, right, for the creator. I mean, in a nutshell, one thing that we can agree on is that we exist. We are definitely here right now, right? We exist. We are matter, and we exist in time. We exist in chronology, right? So then the question is that where does biology take its root? Like, in other words, where does nature originate from?
Well,
where did it come from?
That's a long-standing question, like.
And do you agree that there's an answer to that question?
There's probably an answer, but I don't know if we'll ever really be able to prove it.
That's exactly my point. That again, if you mean empirically, scientifically prove it, there is a correct answer out there. There is a correct answer out there. There is either a God, that's correct, or there's no God, that's correct, or there's multiple gods, as some people like to say. That's correct. But again, none of these answers, one of which is true. I think logically we have to infer one of these possibilities is true, unless you can think of a fourth. The fourth one, okay.
Additional.
Well, actually, okay, fourth one. Let's say the eternal universe, or the universe created itself out of nothing, or something like that. So, but logically, outside of these 4 or 5 options, it's going to be hard to think of a 6th and a 7th and an 8th. Our minds are not going to take us there, and yet none of these options can be proved in the way that you might want it to be proved, which is empirically under a microscope.
Well, just because there are some things you can't prove in science necessarily, or like some questions you can't prove, does not mean that counts as like. I don't see how this serves as proof for just because you can't prove, for example, how life originated. Did it start off with these little molecules in a soup in like a very hot world, or no one can really say.
So this is where I think we have to make use of philosophy and not science, because scientifically we're not going to travel back in time, and we're not going to observe what happened there at the moment of the creation, if there was a creation of the universe, and we're not going to put that on a videotape and upload it to YouTube. That's not going to happen. That option is not there. So philosophically then, where I was going with that was that we agree that we exist, definitely. We are matter, right? We exist. Although, believe it or not, even this can be a point of belief as well too. Some of the ultra skeptics will say that can you be completely sure that I do exist, or that I am a conscious being, or that you're not in a dream right now, for example, as opposed to reality.
Are we in a simulation?
Or are we brains in a jar in the matrix or something like that? But again, these are logical assumptions that we make. These are reasonable assumptions that we make every day. You do exist, I do exist, we're not in a dream, we actually are talking, we are two conscious sentient beings, etc. So anyhow, now the point being that where did nature come from? We both agree we can't travel back in time and make a YouTube video of what happened. But again, logically, I can think of 3-4 possible scenarios. So one is the theistic option, which is what we Muslims would say, that there is a creator. There's an eternal creator or eternal being, and he's responsible for the creation of time and space. All right. Number 2 is that there is no creator. There's no need for a creation, because the world always existed. Matter always existed. Time always existed. But the philosophical problem with that is that if you go infinitely or eternally back into time, you come across the problem of traversing infinity, which means how did we cross over infinity to get to this moment in time? Right. So I can illustrate that if that doesn't make sense. So if there's a line of dominoes here that leads to somewhere behind that building, right? And now we see the dominoes falling, and eventually the last domino falls in front of us. You and I are both going to assume that there must be a starting point to that line of dominoes. It's either behind the building, it could be a mile away, it could, theoretically, it could be 50 miles away, 100 kilometers away, but there had to be a beginning, because if there wasn't a beginning, if the line of dominoes went forever into infinity, then how did that process of falling dominoes ever reach here?
Well, I mean, this is a long-standing question in like physics and stuff, right? Like, how did the universe start? So, I don't know if you necessarily need a god for the universe to start, right? Because you presented either, a god made the universe, or it was always there, but maybe it wasn't always there and it just started somehow. But obviously, I don't have the answers to this, and neither do they. And pretty much we can only speculate. So.
But so can we at least agree on that point then, that whether God created the beginning of the universe or not, but there had to be a beginning? Have we established that point? So in other words,
I have no opinion on whether there had to be a beginning or not, because maybe it's something totally wild that we haven't thought of.
Yeah. But again, I think reasonable faith trumps unreasonable or blind faith, right?
Well,
so to say that there's an option which I can't, not to put you on the spot here too much, but I mean there's a point that there's an option which I can't elaborate at, I can't even hint at it, I can't even allude to it, but maybe it's out there and it exists. Doesn't this seem even more speculative then?
The idea it's all speculative, right? But
on the spectrum of speculation,
and I don't think that using philosophy in this sense really serves as a proof either, or evidence.
But did you understand the problem of why I believe there should be a beginning to time? So for us to reach June, I think 20th, I think today, right?
Well, I understand why you would think there should be a beginning, but you can't prove that there is, right? So to you it seems reasonable, but we don't know yet, that's all.
Yeah, from my perspective, that actually would be the proof that in order for us to reach Sunday, June 20th in the calendar, there has to be a calendar, with a beginning. There has to be a calendar, because if there wasn't, it would be like me to see if I told you that I'll meet you here again in 2 days, or I'll meet you here in a week, we can do that, right? Again, theoretically, if I said I'll meet you in 5 years on the same date at the same place, we could do that, right? If God gives us life to do that. But if I said I'll meet you here after an infinite amount of time,
well, you'd be dead. There's no.
Well, infinite. Even if we lived infinitely, we would never meet after an infinite amount of time, because you can never finish infinity, right? Like you can never cross over infinity. You can cross over 2 days. You can wait 5 days. You can wait out 5 years. But you can't wait out infinity. So in the same way that we can't wait out infinity into the future and meet after an infinite amount of time, my argument is that we can't do it backwards either. We couldn't have crossed over an infinite amount of time in order to arrive at Sunday, June 20th. There had to be a start of that domino line, right? Now, true, whether God started that, Zeus started that, atheists can make all these kinds of objections, or I'm not calling you an atheist, I'm just saying these are all possible objections that, okay, maybe the motion set itself and time set itself in motion, but it had to have been set in motion for starters. There had to have been a beginning of time. See?
I don't know, I don't have an answer for you, so...
Well, but that's fine. But just reflect on that question. We can leave it at that. We don't have to push that any farther. Pun intended. I don't think we can push it any farther, right?
Yeah.
But just reflect on that, because I think there has to have been a beginning of time, and then the next question would have been that whatever set time in motion, how could that itself have been within time? That would be nature creating nature. Time creating time would be nature creating nature, right? So this is one of the reasons that we would argue, again, by philosophical and logical inference, that there must be an eternal being that is not anchored in time and space, that is outside of time and space, that is needed in order to create time and space. This is something to think about, just something to reflect on.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if there was something before the Big Bang, then I don't know. I don't think we can define whether there's a start or an end. And also, just because something can go on for infinity in one direction does not mean that it necessarily goes to infinity in the other direction, right? If
I'm not mistaken, I think that the general consensus right now, at the moment, and these things change, of course, from decade to decade, they do change, but at the moment, the majority of scientists, or more specifically cosmologists, they do believe that there was a beginning point to time and space. So when they talk about the Big Bang, they can't really speak of what's before the Big Bang. If you ask them what was before, they'll say nothing, or they'll say you can't really ask about what was before because there is no before, right? So which is why I prefer to use outside of, like exterior to, different from time and space. So Allah for us is different than time, he's different than space, and matter. He's something that is beyond that. But some other things to just quickly think about, I'll let you go because I know you are on your way, is like, have you ever read an English translation of the Quran?
No, probably will not, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I mean, see, here's the thing. Like, if somebody told me, for example, right, that my mother authored a book, or she wrote a diary that was lost, and now we found her, or something, I would be curious to at least look at it, right? Because I think, wanting to be close to my mother, I'd be curious to see, that was this book really written by her? What was it? So, out of all of the religious books or scriptures in the world, this might come as a surprise to you, and you can push back on this and you can question this if you want. To my knowledge, there's actually only one scripture that even makes the claim that it's direct revelation, direct verbatim words of God. Verbatim meaning word for word, dictated words of God.
Well, I mean, there's no evidence for that either, right? Like,
no,
it's just
fine.
written in a book.
Yeah, fine. But I'm saying that's at least one reason to open your mind or to explore that book. If there's only one book out of all the books in the world, like Robarts Library, 13 floors, books upon books, right? Now there's one book, right, in that library that is claiming to be divine revelation, that's claiming to be from the Creator. I think that warrants and deserves our attention, to at least have a look at that and see, since you're studying biology, as to what does this book have to say about biology. I mean, because if it is from an all-knowing Creator, if it is from the one who created biology, who created time and space, then he should know a thing or two about nature. He should know a thing or two about biology, right?
Well, so, it doesn't mean he actually wrote it down, assuming, which is a big assumption, that it was actually, told. For example, like, a lot of things, but I won't know what you know unless I ask the question, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, unless the book is all-encompassing, which is questionable considering it's not like, an endless book. It's surely missing information, and also was written however long ago.
Well, if we're not making time to read this finite book of 114 short chapters, then we can understand God's wisdom in not revealing, 14 stories of biology books, right, for us to read, because you wouldn't make time for that. You don't make the time for the Quran, then an infinite book that contains an infinite amount of knowledge. We would certainly not bother to open that or take time to read that. So I don't think that the book has to be all-encompassing. I think if it gives us and reveals us some information which we know a human being at that time couldn't have known. When I say at that time, what I mean is Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, lived 1400 years ago, and he claimed that the words of this book, the Quran, are a revelation given to him, right, by God through the angel Gabriel. So if this claim is true, then there would be information in that book which Prophet Muhammad could not have been privy to. Like, he couldn't have known these things by virtue of being a 7th century Arabian man who has no schooling, who is not literate, who cannot read even in his own language, let alone the Greek works of Galen or so forth. If it doesn't have to be all-encompassing information, if it gives us even tidbits of information which a human being reasonably at that time couldn't have known, then I'm putting to you that this would be one indication amongst others. This would be at least one indication for us to consider the possibility that this is in fact from a divine source and not a human source. So right here at University of Toronto, for example, you can look this up. There was a professor of, what was that? The professor of embryology here at University of Toronto. His name was Dr. Keith Moore. And what makes this testimony even more interesting is that he's not a Muslim. But as far as we're aware, he never officially converted to Islam. But when he read about what the Quran said about embryology, he said that this is completely correct. The Quran talks about like the 3 veils of darkness in the womb that the embryo is in, and he said that this was not known human scientific knowledge at that time. Yet he described the process in a remarkably accurate way, right? So all I'm saying is, keep your mind open to this, because I mean, I get it. We've all been there. We're still there. We have to make our livelihood, careers, studies, and all that. But I do think, Serge, that beyond career and studies and academics, there has to be something more. You know what I mean? There has to be something more. If it's not Islam for you, but that search and that questioning, that curiosity has to be there. Like, what's the real purpose of my life? Is there a higher moral and spiritual purpose to my life? Or are we just really sophisticated squirrels, right? The squirrels gather almonds, they eat, they sleep, they reproduce, and are we just like very sophisticated forms or versions of that? And I can't speak on your behalf, but I'm saying for me, there's something deep inside me that says, no, there has to be something higher, a higher moral and spiritual purpose than that.
Yeah, well, I mean, if that's how you want to view the world, then, power to you. But I just think that religion is something that you have to, if you believe in it, then you believe in it, but I don't accept that, like, philosophical arguments like that are really evidence for it. And even for previous predictions that someone couldn't have known, like, people get lucky sometimes. For example, there are many economists or people that predict, there's going to be an economic crash, for example, and they're wrong until they're right. And then when they're right, suddenly they're like, a seer or something.
That's a great point, man. That's a great point. In fact, there's people in my family that have this tendency too. So, for example, my wife, sometimes she has dreams and then it works out just like she saw in the dream. But this is exactly what I do. I remind her and I say, but how many of your dreams didn't come true? Yeah. Okay, you had a bad feeling about such and such a relative and then he ended up dying a week later. I mean, maybe that is some kind of a sign from God, but how many times did you have bad, despairing feelings about other relatives and they didn't die? They lived for years afterwards. So, believe me, I go with that kind of skeptical mindset myself too, right? And I agree with you. If you're taking wild guesses in the dark, at least some of those arrows are going to land on target, right?
Yeah.
Some of those arrows. And then that brings up another question, which really you can only explore if you do one day. Take the time. I'm not saying drop everything you're doing right now, start reading the Quran, but one day explore that book, because to see if your prediction is correct. That if he was making, if the Prophet Muhammad was the one authoring the Quran rather than it being a revelation from God to him, then some of those arrows will miss the mark. Invariably, some of those guesses, some of those predictions will be completely wrong and off.
45 seconds left. 45 seconds.
Yeah. So that would be something for you to see. That there's something in the Quran that is remarkably accurate and correct. But are there equally things that are completely scientifically incorrect and wrong? Right. That'd be one possibility of how you, as someone with a scientific mind, could explore and read the Quran. The other thing is, if you're not convinced by these philosophical proofs, but you haven't actually given a reason for why you're not convinced by these philosophical proofs. So for example, what scientifically or empirically right now would prove to you that you're not in a dream, right? What would prove to you that? So the interesting thing is that, I mean, maybe at this point in the conversation, maybe I can ask and you won't mind. Like, you categorize yourself as an atheist, then I take it, or maybe agnostic or something.
I would say agnostic.
Agnostic, yeah. Fair enough, right? Yeah, fair enough.
I can't.
The thing is, even your skepticism, I was going to say earlier on disbelief, but you don't categorize yourself as a disbeliever. You're just not sure. God could exist. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, right? But this skepticism, even this cannot take place without you being a believer first. Because you're believing that we're in an actual conversation. You're believing that we're actually standing here in the garden having a real conversation, that this isn't a dream. You see what I'm saying? So your starting point still has to be one of trust in something, reasonable trust and reasonable faith, right? Because I could turn back and I could say the same thing to you, that if you want to believe you're in a dream, you can. If you don't want to believe in a dream, you can't. But we all think it's reasonable for us to assume here that we are in reality, live right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, we all have to live with each other, so whether you believe you're in a simulation or not, don't break the law, right? So.
Well, maybe I'm going a little bit off topic here, but I've been having, for the past year, I've been having a lot of what's called lucid dreams. Mm-hmm. So lucid dreams are when you're in a dream and you act, and trust me, man, I stop following the rules. I do what I want, because there are times when I'm completely aware I'm in a lucid dream. I can do what I want, and I do reckless things that I would never do in reality. The other night I fought like 10 guys at once. No fear, because I was completely aware of the fact I was completely aware of the fact that I was in a dream. Yet you would call me, you would call me foolish if I did that right now and went and started a fight with 10 guys, right?
Yeah.
It's just something to think about. But I'll let you go with that because you've given us a lot of time. I appreciate it. That's what I had to share with you today, I guess, based on the way our conversation went. And just in closing, if you had any questions about Islam or about religion in general, I'll try to give you a short answer if you have any concerns or questions. And don't worry about offending or anything like that. Like, we're here to have a frank conversation. So.
People can do what they want. Just be cooperative with everyone.
Yeah, no. Well, we can agree to that. We can definitely agree to that. No doubt about that. Thank you, Serge, for your time. I appreciate it. We're in the middle of a pandemic, so that's why we're not obviously shaking hands. But I do appreciate you stopping.